Now the spline IK is another one that actually works on a chain of bones. So here I've gone ahead and created myself 10 bone chain just for this demonstration. The number of bones doesn't really matter. And I also have gone ahead and created a spline object. And this is just a Bezier curve. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertices. And you'll notice I actually have a shape key on there with some animation just to save myself some time later to show you the curve bending. I don't have to jump into the curve all the time and mess around with it that way. All right, so let's reset my bone back to where it's meant to be. And like our last IK constraint, the constraint on this one gets added to the end of the chain. So the order in which we do that, I'm going to jump back into object mode. We select our target first, then we shift select our armature, jump into pose mode, and then make sure that our last bone is selected. I'm going to use my shortcut, Control Shift C, and then choose Spline IK. And instantly you'll see something's gone a little bit weird, and that's because our end bone has snapped all the way from the start to the end of our spline. So let's just go over to our settings, and we know that that is the chain length, exactly like the other IK constraint. So we can drag this up if we like, but we already know that it's a chain of 10, so I'm just going to type in 10 there. Now when I scrub my animation, you'll see that that chain is following along with our bendy curve here. And you might be thinking, oh, this is great for animation, but the problem is we actually have to go in here into a different object and animate these vertices. And these verts don't actually have very good animation tools. So if we were to set this up in animation, we'd actually have some controls that actually move these ones around. So you're not jumping in between two objects all the time. So while at first you might think you'll be using quite a lot of these spline IKs all over the place, and in other softwares you do, the bendy bones in Blender have an advantage of where you don't need this extra setup. You can actually do a lot of this stuff with just a plain bendy bone. Let's jump back to our constraint here, and I'll show you some more settings. So underneath here we have our even distributions. This isn't going to do anything in my case, and that is because all of these bones were the same length. But if I happen to change one, let's just scale this one by 0.5, and then I'll turn this on and off. You'll see that it's making all of the bones an even distribution. I'll just undo that weird change that I made. The chain offset here is just a little checkbox, which lets us move our whole chain away, translate it away rather. We still can't rotate it. It lets us move it away from our target object, but you'll see it's working exactly the same. Now, if we disable this, you'll see it snap back. Boom, it's snapping back to the start of our curve. We do have some more settings here. In this use curve radius, when we have this one enabled, I'll just select the curve there. For each of these vertices, we actually have a radius setting. And if I raise this up, you'll see the effect that that has, which is a pretty handy feature, although you'll see we can achieve that same effect with bendy bones as well. And we have two more settings. They are to do with the scaling of our bones. The first one is the Y scale. By default, this is set to fit curve, which means it will stretch the whole entire chain of bones, or the chain length rather. It's going to stretch that all the way from the start of the curve to the end of the curve. The next option is to choose none, and that will let our bones stick to the curve, but they won't stretch at all. So you can see that when we bend our curve, it increases its length, but the bones no longer stretch all the way to the end. They are remaining at their own same length. And the final option is the bone original. This will take into account the Y scale we input on the bones themselves. So when I scale the Y here, this is going to be passed along to all the children in the chain, but those bones are still going to follow the curve object. And that's the way that that one works. All right, I'll just reset everything. And then our final setting is the XZ scale mode. This is the volume preservation for when our bones stretch. So when this is set to none, the X and the Z are not going to scale at all. It's just going to be the Y, or the length of the bone, that scales along here. If we set this to bone original, it's actually going to use our local transforms up here. And you can see that that scale on the X and the Z is being passed on down the chain. Now when we choose inverse, that's essentially going to do an inverse of what the Y scale is doing. So if our Y scale was at 2, then the inverse of that would be 1/2. And then finally, we have our volume preservation down here. And this is exactly the same as our stretch to constraint. You can see we've got our volume variation, we have our minimum, our maximum, and our smooth, as well as use the original scale options. So this volume preservation setting works exactly the same as the stretch to constraint. And that is our spline IK. Now, as I said, you might think that you would use this quite a lot, but with the invention of bendy bones, that functionality and more can be utilized within the same object, the same armature rig, rather than requiring a secondary object, that being a curve. All right, on to the next one.